In this video, we're going to cover the Foliage tool and how we can use it to paint static meshes around our world and around our landscapes. So I have just the File, New Level, Open World level open right here. This level is a good starting project to try this out because this is a landscaped world right here. These are all landscape components that are used to kind of build out this world. Now, to use the Foliage tool, what we need to do is change our mode from selection mode or landscape or wherever we are to foliage right here. When we do that, we are prompted with a pretty clear message saying, hey, drop foliage here. Now, for our foliage, what we can use are either static meshes or foliage to actually paint, similar to how we used our sculpt tool or our paint tool from the previous two steps. So I have a bunch of static meshes from my earlier assignments. If I go to my meshes folder, I have grass and I have trees and lots of different options here, rocks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this tree right here and I'm going to pop it into this foliage right here. When I do that, it's going to create a new component that's actually a foliage type component. So I'm going to hit save right here. And out of the gate, it has this tree right here. And now I can see my brush shape right here, this dome shape. And as soon as I click it, actually your density is probably a little higher. I'll go density like 0.5 right here. My brush is right here. If I click it, it actually plops a bunch of trees into my world right here. And I can click and drag and pull around, but there's a pretty obvious issue with this tree. The issue is it is too low on my landscape, on my ground. So to fix this, if I go to my content drawer, I can open up the foliage tool right here that I just created. So I'm going to double click this and I can start to adjust how this foliage is going to be painted into my landscape. So a couple things I can start to play around with. You know, the placement is a big one for us. There's some instance settings, which is a big one for us. We'll look at a couple of these later. But working from the top down, the Z offset is the culprit of this problem right here. Now, I could guess and check my way to seeing, like, what's a good Z offset for this. If I click this, so I'm a little higher now. I'm heading the right direction. I'm going to Control Z to undo it over here. But what I like to do instead is take one of my meshes. So I'm going to grab my tree. I'm actually going to change back to selection mode first. And I'm going to simply drag it into my world. And I can see currently I'm at an offset of 0. Well, if I start to pull this up, I can lay it out at a Z that looks right to me. So I think a Z of 800 looks pretty good. I don't recommend having it be like exactly floating on top of the shape. Because what happens when you start to get into some bumps or some offsets, you might have like a tree that's floating a little bit then. I almost recommend like rooting it a little bit. So right there, there's a little bit that's underground, a little bit there. I think that's going to look pretty solid as I go through and do it. So I can do 800 right here. So I'm going to set my minimum value at 800. And in this example, I'm going to set my max value at 800. Now, other things I could play around with, how like the angle of it is aligned. I could do a random yaw, so kind of like a random rotation, random pitch. A lot of this will add variety to your foliage. Other things that you can do, you can decide if it casts a shadow or not, a dynamic shadow. You know, you might want to uncheck these if you're seeing some performance issues within your project. Finally, a real common one that needs to be changed is the collision preset. If you want your foliage to be something that is just a visual feature of your world, you leave it as no collision. If you want the player to actually hit it or run into it, I would probably change it to block all. Generally, what I have found are items like trees and rocks, I want the character to actually hit, so it would be a block. But something like grass or flowers, I'd like to probably ignore all. That way the player can simply run through them. So I'm going to lock this in. I'm going to go back to my world. I'm going to delete this tree for right now. And I'm going to go back to my foliage right here. And now, because I saved that foliage object, this object has inherited those settings. And I can click and it starts to create trees. And that was just a little bit of a click, and I have 240 trees right there. So one click makes about 100 trees. That's a little too much. So I'm going to change my density right here from 0.2. We're going to go really low. We're going to go to 0.1. We'll see what that gives us. Still too much, 50 trees per click. So I'm going to go even smaller. I'm going to go like 0.02 right here. Do a click. That might have been 2 clicks. Yeah, so that's 4 trees per click. Now I can start to click and drag, and that still feels like too much for me. But I could start to kind of lay out a forest like this. All right, let's undo. One more time. I'm going to go even smaller. I'm going to go 0.01. And I'm going to start to click and drag. I'm a little happier with that. Making my brush size bigger will also allow me to then kind of paint a larger area. And that'll often help with some of the density of it. So it's 0.01 trees per one of these areas as I'm going around. Now, I'm going to do all these again. And again, I can start to kind of lay out a forest just by clicking and dragging my, I call this almost like the foliage dome right here. Perfect. All right. Now, those settings I changed in the object are fantastic because there's permanent. I can make instance changes to them right here. So I can adjust those same settings on one of these added components inside this foliage if I wanted to as well. Sometimes what you'll see are like random heights. So I can go like 500 to 800. I know I don't want my trees to be more than 800 because they're going to be floating. So if I start to click here and look around, now I get kind of this little 200 variance of the height of my trees. That might be a little too low for me because now my character can't walk under them. So I could undo, and I'll try like 700 to 800. Not a huge amount of variance, but again, something I can play around with. It just makes it look a little bit different as it's going around. You know, other settings, I know I mentioned I could start playing around with the scale. You know, I could have some of the trees be a little bit smaller, a little bit larger. I know we'll go like 0.5 to 1.5. Now I get kind of a good variety of widths of my trees right here. And again, all this is trying to make it look a little bit more realistic by having it be a little bit more imperfect, a little bit more random. All right. Now, on top of just using one piece of foliage, what I can start to do is add more than one tree at the same time. So I have this tree right here. I'm going to create another one. I have this tree right here. I'm going to create another one. I don't know if I have any other similar trees. We'll add this one in here too. So I'm kind of adding all my block trees right here. Now I'm going to go out on a limb, and I guess I got one more right here. And assume that all of these trees have that like about 800 offset. So I'm going to open up this tree right here. Open up in my other tab over here. I'm going to set it to 800. Lock it in. I am going to open up. Already got that one open. This one, we'll go 800. Do these. And I might find that some of these are not the proper Z offsets. I could always go back and change them if I wanted to. So I'm going to do a save all. I'll just save my levels untitled 2. Perfect. All right, going back to my world. Now when I go to paint, it is going to use all of these trees per click. And this starts to create a little bit more variety again within here. So that was a single click, created 22 of each of those trees. I'm probably going to have to adjust that density again. Now I go back up to here. I can start to lower this to even more. Let's go 0.001 maybe. We'll see what that gives us. Okay, I'm a little happier with that. Looks like my Z offset is not too great for a couple of these trees. These are all items I'll have to go back and adjust later on. But with this setting right here, what I could do is start to click and drag and start to make a forest that has more than one tree in it. Now at any given time, I could disable some of these. So maybe I want more of this like simple dark green cube one right here. I could just do that one. And now I want some more of these ones. Like maybe this is somehow showing some sort of path over here. So I'm gonna do this one over to here, this one over to here. This allows you to have control what you're painting or not painting. Now again, I can add other shapes into here, right? Like maybe I want to do these rocks. Maybe I want to do the grass right here. I'll do some grass. Perfect. Save, 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 save. I'm going to make sure all of these are unchecked. I can go through then and start to, oh, got something checked I don't want over there. There we go. Paint some grass. Now the grass can probably use a little bit more density down here. Let's see what we're doing. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go up the density of my grass. We'll go to like 0.2. We'll see what that gives us. That looks pretty good. And I can start to kind of create this grassy feel a little bit. And I could put this over my foliage that already exists. And because there's kind of a random selection of these, it gives a pretty good variety as I'm working through here. I will add that sometimes what you'll find, especially when you're designing, you really want kind of like complete control of your shapes. You could place single instances of them. I could say like, hey, I want a single piece of grass right here or here. Or I want a single tree here. Or what you'll find is that you'll just use the static mesh and just simply drag it out from selection mode. That's how we can use foliage to paint our world with various static meshes.